Before France became a famous kingdom or a major European power, its earliest roots lay in the collapse of the Western Roman Empire and the migration of Germanic peoples. Among these groups, the Franks would shape the region's future more than any other. Their gradual rise and political structures formed the foundations of what would become the French state and eventually a global empire. In the 5th century, Roman authority in Gaul, the future France, was fragmenting. Into this vacuum stepped the Franks, a confederation of Germanic tribes from the Rhine frontier. They moved gradually, sometimes as Roman allies, before becoming independent rulers. The most influential early Frankish leader was Clovis, who united many Frankish tribes in the late 5th century. He expanded Frankish territory and strategically converted to Catholicism after a key victory, winning support from the Gallo-Roman elite. His successors, the Merovingians, saw the kingdom grow but become unstable due to divisions among heirs. Power shifted to palace officials called mayors of the palace, one of whom was Charles Martel. His victory at the Battle of Tours in 732 showed the Franks could defend their lands. Charles Martel's son, Pepin the Short, gained papal recognition to become the first Carolingian king, but it was his son Charlemagne who achieved imperial ambition. Crowned Emperor of the Romans in 800, he expanded Frankish rule across Western and Central Europe, reformed administration, and encouraged learning. After his death, the empire was divided among his heirs, weakening central authority. The western portion became increasingly distinct, and from it the early Kingdom of France emerged in the 10th century. This is the history of France. As Europe experienced fresh waves of instability, including Viking raids and invasions from multiple directions, noble families gained significant autonomy. Kings struggled to assert control over powerful local lords who commanded their own armies and collected their own taxes. It was during this difficult period that Hugh Capet became king. His election in 987 marked the beginning of the Capetian dynasty, which would rule France for more than 3 centuries. Hugh Capet did not control a large kingdom at first. His direct domain centered on Paris and the surrounding regions of the Île-de-France, a relatively small area compared to the lands held by many of his nobles. But his dynasty survived thanks to careful alliances, reliable succession through male heirs, and the slow but deliberate expansion of royal authority. The Capetian kings built power not through sudden conquest, but through methodical statecraft that unfolded over many generations. They arranged marriages that brought new territories into the royal domain, established clearer inheritance rules that prevented excessive fragmentation, and strengthened ties with the church, which provided both legitimacy and administrative support. Their reign also coincided with the gradual growth of towns, long-distance trade, and agricultural productivity, all of which gave the monarchy more resources and revenue than any noble could command. By the time of King Philip II, often called Philip Augustus, in the late 12th and early 13th centuries, the French crown had achieved much firmer control over its nobles and had begun expanding into lands previously dominated by English kings. Throughout these centuries, the idea of France as a unified kingdom slowly took shape in the minds of its people. It was not yet the centralized state that would later build a global empire, but the foundations were clearly there: a monarchy seeking legitimacy, a church offering spiritual authority, and a cultural identity formed by Latin Christianity, feudal bonds, and shared traditions. The rulers of France were learning to balance alliances, warfare, administration, and the demands of a diverse population spread across many different regions. Another essential factor was the evolving relationship between kings and the church. From Clovis to Charlemagne to the Capetians, French rulers benefited enormously from religious support, which strengthened their claims to rule and helped them govern a land made up of many local powers. Bishops served as royal administrators. Monasteries preserved classical and religious knowledge. Church ceremonies reinforced the sense of a sacred monarchy that answered ultimately to God alone. France became in many ways the heartland of medieval Western Christianity, a reputation that would shape its culture far beyond the Middle Ages. By the early 13th century, the Kingdom of France was entering a new stage of development. The long process of unification that had begun under the early Capetian kings was now giving way to something more ambitious: the creation of a centralized state capable of enforcing royal authority across diverse regions, challenging rival powers, and shaping the direction of European politics. This period would see the French monarchy grow in strength, develop new administrative institutions, and confront challenges that pushed it toward a clearer sense of national identity and long-term strategy. At the heart of this transformation stood rulers like Philip II, who expanded the power of the French crown with a combination of military campaigns, administrative reforms, and political skill that impressed all of Europe. Earlier kings had worked to strengthen their direct lands, but Philip II went much further. He seized every opportunity to weaken the powerful English monarchy, which still held large territories in France, as a legacy of the Norman conquest and subsequent marriages. Through calculated wars and diplomatic pressure, he managed to take regions such as Normandy, Anjou, and Touraine from the English king, greatly enlarging the royal domain. These gains not only increased French territory, but also reduced the influence of nobles who might have challenged the crown. Philip's success demonstrated an important shift in the nature of French kingship. The monarchy was no longer a symbolic institution surrounded by powerful regional lords who could ignore it at will. It was becoming the commanding force in a political structure where the king's word carried real weight across the land. To support this new level of control, Philip invested heavily in administration. He began using written records more systematically, a practice that helped the monarchy govern more effectively and consistently. Royal officials known as baillis and sénéchaux were appointed to oversee justice, collect revenues, and enforce royal policies in provinces far from Paris. Their presence strengthened the king's ability to manage distant regions and ensured that local nobles had less space to act independently. This increased centralization had significant social consequences. As towns grew and trade expanded across Europe, urban communities often sought the king's protection against oppressive local lords. By granting charters and privileges to these towns, French kings gained valuable allies in their efforts to limit noble power. In return, towns supported the monarchy with taxes, manpower, and economic activity. This partnership between the crown and urban society would shape French politics for centuries to come. Another major figure of this era was Louis IX, remembered today as Saint Louis. His reign combined strong governance with deep personal piety, and his influence extended far beyond his own lifetime. Louis IX worked tirelessly to improve justice within the kingdom. He firmly believed that a king should rule with fairness and compassion, and he regularly heard legal cases in person, sitting under an oak tree, according to legend. His efforts helped establish the idea that the crown was the ultimate source of justice in the realm. Royal courts expanded their authority, and appeals increasingly flowed toward the monarchy instead of local feudal courts. Under Louis IX, the French administration grew more professional. Written laws and regulations multiplied, and officials were expected to follow clearer procedures. These developments helped shape a more predictable and stable government, one that citizens could rely on even when they were far from the capital. Louis also strengthened the monarchy's relationship with the church. Although he supported the church generously, he also defended the rights of the crown, insisting that royal authority should not be overshadowed by religious influence. His balanced approach contributed to a lasting structure in which monarchy and church worked together but maintained distinct roles. During this period, France also engaged in wider European politics. Neighbouring kingdoms such as England and the Holy Roman Empire posed significant challenges. The rivalry with England in particular shaped the political landscape for generations. English kings who ruled territories on the continent were technically vassals of the French crown, but in practice they acted as independent rulers. This imbalance led to repeated tensions and set the foundation for later conflicts that would last for more than a century. France's growing power under Philip II and Louis IX shifted the balance of this relationship, reducing English influence and strengthening French sovereignty. As royal power expanded, the monarchy faced new internal challenges. Nobles who had once acted autonomously found themselves constrained by stronger central authority. Some resisted, forming alliances or taking up arms against the crown. Yet the kings of France responded with diplomacy or military force, gradually reinforcing their dominance. One important example was the suppression of powerful aristocratic families who attempted to regain their former autonomy. Royal armies, supported by improved taxation and administrative organization, usually prevailed. Each victory further discouraged noble resistance and helped integrate the kingdom more tightly under a single authority. By the early 14th century, France had grown into one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe. Its monarchy was stronger, its administration more organized, and its cultural influence broader than ever before. Yet beneath this impressive surface of strength lay unresolved tensions, especially with England, whose kings still held significant territories on the European continent. These tensions, combined with dynastic disputes over the French crown and shifting alliances among Europe's royal families, would lead to one of the longest and most transformative conflicts in medieval history, the 100 Years' War. This struggle did not last a single continuous century, but it unfolded through a long series of campaigns, truces, and renewed battles. It reshaped the identity of France, tested the legitimacy of its rulers to the breaking point, and brought forth one of history's most symbolic figures, Joan of Arc. The origins of the conflict lay in the intertwined royal families of France and England. Through years of strategic marriages and complicated inheritances, the kings of England had come to hold lands in France as vassals of the French crown. This arrangement created constant tension. No king was comfortable being both an independent ruler and a vassal to another monarch. When the French king Charles IV died without a direct male heir, the issue of succession brought the long-simmering rivalry to a breaking point. Edward III, King of England and grandson of a French king through his mother, put forward a claim to the French throne. The French nobility, however, chose Philip VI, a member of a different branch of the royal family. France did not recognize inheritance through the female line, and Philip's supporters insisted that the crown could not pass through a woman. This disagreement could have remained a political debate, but deeper issues made war almost inevitable. English kings feared losing their territories in France if the French crown grew too powerful. French kings wanted to end English influence completely within their borders. Trade disputes between the two kingdoms added further tension, especially over the wealthy region of Flanders, where English wool supported a thriving cloth industry that both powers wanted to control. These combined pressures set the stage for a conflict far larger than a simple question of succession to the throne. Early in the war, English forces achieved several dramatic victories that shocked the French court. Their success came in large part from their innovative military tactics. English armies relied heavily on longbowmen, who could unleash rapid volleys of arrows that disrupted enemy formations from a great distance. French knights, still following older traditions of heavy cavalry charges directly into enemy lines, often found themselves completely unprepared for this new style of warfare. Battles such as Crécy and Poitiers demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of English tactics. In one of these early engagements, the French king John II was even captured on the battlefield. a humiliation that weakened French morale and strained the kingdom's finances to the breaking point. These defeats exposed deep divisions within France itself. Many nobles were reluctant to cooperate fully with the crown, preferring to look after their own interests first. Regional loyalties often mattered more than any sense of national unity. In some areas, local lords negotiated with the English for their own benefit, prioritizing their private interests over the stability of the kingdom as a whole. The monarchy struggled to coordinate the war effort across a diverse and sometimes rebellious landscape of competing loyalties. Adding to these challenges, France faced devastating crises that went far beyond the battlefield. The spread of the plague, known as the Black Death, caused massive population loss across Europe. In France, entire villages were emptied of their inhabitants, productive farmland was abandoned, and social structures were strained to the breaking point. Economic hardship followed, making it even harder for the monarchy to raise funds for the war. These hardships created widespread unrest among peasants, some of whom rose in violent uprisings against their rulers. One of the most notable rebellions, known as the Jacquerie, erupted as peasants vented their frustration against noble landlords and the general chaos of the time. Although the uprising was eventually crushed with great brutality, it showed just how fragile the kingdom had become. Meanwhile, English successes continued. For a time, they gained control over large parts of northern France, including key territories like Normandy. The English king, Henry V, later launched a renewed campaign during a period of French weakness caused by internal conflicts within the French royal family itself. The French court was divided between two rival factions, the Armagnacs and the Burgundians. These groups competed for influence and occasionally fought one another directly, giving the English a powerful advantage. Henry V captured the imagination of his supporters with his stunning victory at the Battle of Agincourt, where a smaller and exhausted English force defeated a much larger French army. After this victory, he negotiated the Treaty of Troyes, in which the French king, Charles VI, recognized Henry as his heir and agreed that the crown of France would pass to the English monarchy. Many French nobles accepted this arrangement, especially those aligned with the Burgundians, who had become hostile to the rival Armagnac faction. It seemed for a moment that France might fall under English rule completely. Yet the French monarchy still had supporters who refused to accept English dominance. One of these was Charles, the son of the French king, who contested the treaty and claimed the title of Dauphin, or heir to the throne. However, Charles faced enormous obstacles. Much of northern France was under English control, and many citizens doubted his ability to lead effectively. His court, based in the southern region of the Loire Valley, lacked resources and legitimacy. France had reached a low point, divided, weakened, and deeply uncertain of its future. It was in this bleak moment that Joan of Arc appeared on the scene. A young woman from the village of Domremy in northeastern France, she claimed to have received visions from saints urging her to support the Dauphin and help lift the English siege of the city of Orléans. Her arrival at Charles' court was completely unexpected, and many doubted her story. Yet Charles eventually agreed to give her a chance, partly because he had little left to lose. Joan's presence brought a surge of hope and determination to the French forces. She encouraged soldiers, inspired the exhausted population, and gave the Dauphin's followers renewed confidence. Her role in lifting the siege of Orléans became a turning point in the war. Although she was not a battlefield commander in the modern sense, her influence on morale and strategy was undeniable. French forces became more organized and more daring, and Joan's determination helped unite factions that had previously struggled to cooperate. After the victory at Orléans, Joan urged Charles to travel to Reims for his coronation. The symbolism of this location was crucial. French kings had traditionally been crowned at Reims for centuries, and performing the ceremony there would reinforce Charles's legitimacy in the eyes of all France. Despite the risks involved in crossing territory still contested by the English and their allies, Charles agreed. When he was crowned as Charles VII, the event marked a powerful statement that the French monarchy would endure despite all setbacks. Joan's success, however, also brought her powerful enemies. She challenged the traditional assumptions about gender, authority, and religious influence. Some nobles feared her growing popularity among the common people. The English saw her as a direct threat to their claim on the throne. Eventually, she was captured by Burgundian forces, who handed her over to the English for a large sum of money. Joan was put on trial in the city of Rouen, accused of heresy and witchcraft by a court controlled by her enemies. The trial was deeply political, aimed at undermining her influence and discrediting the French king she had supported so passionately. She was condemned and burned at the stake, an event that shocked many across Europe and turned her into a martyr in the eyes of her supporters. Her death did not stop the momentum she had helped create. Over the following decades, French forces strengthened their position, regained lost territory, and pushed the English out of most of France through a series of steady campaigns. Military reforms, improved leadership, and the gradual unification of the kingdom all contributed to the French recovery. The war, once dominated by English advances, turned into a series of French victories. By the time the conflict drew to a close in the mid-15th century, the English held only the city of Calais on the entire continent. When the long turmoil of the 100 Years' War finally eased, France entered a new era filled with opportunity, creativity, and serious internal challenges. The 15th and 16th centuries saw the kingdom transform culturally, politically, and intellectually at a remarkable pace. This was the age of the Renaissance in France, a period that introduced exciting new ideas about art, science, and human potential. It was also a time of growing rivalry with powerful European neighbours and deepening tensions within the kingdom itself, leading to prolonged conflict known as the Wars of Religion. These developments would shape the monarchy, influence French ambitions overseas, and lay the groundwork for France's future role as a major European power. As peace settled over the kingdom, the French monarchy worked to rebuild lost strength. Under kings such as Charles VII and Louis XI, the crown began aggressively consolidating authority. They reorganized the army along more professional lines and improved taxation to secure steady revenue. Towns and trade revived, noble factions weakened, and the idea of a strong central government gained momentum across the country. But the true transformation of French culture and politics appeared during the reign of Francis I, a king whose rule marked the full arrival of the Renaissance spirit in France. Francis I came to the throne in the early 16th century and quickly embraced the artistic and intellectual movements spreading from Italy. He invited Italian artists, architects, and scholars to his court, establishing France as a major center of Renaissance culture. The most famous of these guests was Leonardo da Vinci, who spent his final years in France and brought with him a wealth of knowledge and artistic innovation. Under Francis I, royal chateaux expanded across the Loire Valley in a spectacular fashion. Elegant structures like Chambord and Fontainebleau reflected not only the king's personal taste, but also the broader shift toward a more refined and outward-looking culture. The Renaissance was more than a display of art. It introduced new thinking about politics, science, and the role of the individual in society. Humanist scholars promoted the study of classical texts from ancient Greece and Rome, encouraging a deeper interest in education and critical inquiry. The printing press, which spread rapidly during this era, allowed books to circulate more widely than ever before. This expanded access to knowledge helped shape an emerging class of educated citizens and encouraged lively debate about the nature of power, faith, and society throughout France. While the Renaissance enriched French culture, it also exposed the kingdom to new political pressures. Francis I's reign coincided with the dramatic rise of the Habsburg dynasty, which controlled a vast empire that included Spain, parts of Italy, and territories in Central Europe and the Americas. The rivalry between Francis I and the Habsburg ruler Charles V became one of the defining struggles of the entire era. The two men competed for influence in Italy, fought several costly wars, and attempted to assert dominance over European politics. Although neither gained absolute victory, their fierce rivalry shaped the balance of power across the continent for decades. These military conflicts strained France's finances enormously and highlighted the urgent need for new sources of wealth and trade. Spanish and Portuguese explorers were already establishing routes to the Americas, Africa, and Asia, giving their kingdoms access to new goods and vast resources. France, not wanting to be left behind in the race for global influence, began attempting its own voyages across the Atlantic Ocean. Explorers such as Jacques Cartier journeyed to the lands that would later become Canada, sailing along the St. Lawrence River and establishing early French claims in North America. These efforts did not immediately produce large settlements or riches, but they marked the beginning of French overseas ambition that would grow over time. Back at home, however, a much more dangerous challenge was emerging from within. The Protestant Reformation spread like wildfire across Europe, challenging the Catholic Church's authority and offering alternative forms of Christian worship. In France, this movement attracted followers among both common citizens and influential nobles. These French Protestants, known as Huguenots, began forming communities throughout the kingdom, especially in the south and west. Their growing presence alarmed both the monarchy and the Catholic majority, who feared that religious division would threaten national unity. Attempts by the monarchy to address the issue were hesitant and inconsistent. Some kings tried to suppress Protestant worship by force, while others sought compromise and tolerance. Tensions escalated as influential noble families took sides. The powerful Bourbon family aligned with the Huguenots, while the equally influential Guise family championed Catholic interests. These rivalries pushed France toward a series of violent conflicts that would last for decades. The wars of religion began in the mid-16th century and were marked by shifting alliances, political assassinations, and brutal massacres. One of the most infamous episodes was the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, when thousands of Huguenots were killed in Paris and other cities in a coordinated wave of violence. This atrocity deepened mistrust between communities and prolonged the conflict for many years. Ordinary citizens suffered terribly as armies moved through towns, crops were destroyed, and trade collapsed. The monarchy, trapped between factions, found it increasingly difficult to govern effectively. During this crisis, one figure emerged who would eventually bring stability back to the kingdom: Henry IV. Born a Protestant and a member of the Bourbon family, he inherited a claim to the French throne during the final stages of the conflict. But many Catholic leaders refused to support a Protestant king under any circumstances. Henry understood that to rule a fractured kingdom, he would need to rise above the religious divide. He made a momentous decision to convert to Catholicism, reportedly declaring that Paris is well worth a mass. Whether he said these exact words is debated by historians, but the sentiment clearly reflects his pragmatic approach to leadership. Once on the throne, Henry IV sought to end the cycle of war and distrust. He issued the Edict of Nantes, a landmark agreement that granted limited freedom of worship to Protestants while maintaining Catholicism as the official religion of France. This compromise did not create complete harmony, but it did offer a foundation for peace that had been missing for decades. By recognizing the rights of Huguenots while reinforcing royal control, Henry IV restored a measure of stability that the kingdom had desperately needed. Henry's reign also marked a return to stronger monarchy. He worked to rebuild the economy, repair damaged towns, and improve agriculture. His minister, the skilled administrator Sully, introduced reforms that reduced corruption, encouraged trade, and supported infrastructure. These reforms strengthened the foundations of the state and helped restore public trust after years of chaos. The settlement of the religious wars did more than end violence. It revealed the importance of a monarchy capable of navigating complex political and social pressures. It also highlighted the limits of absolute authority. A king could no longer rely solely on tradition or divine right in a divided country. He needed to manage competing interests and adapt to changing circumstances. This reality would shape the future of French governance for generations. As France entered the 17th century, it stood at the threshold of a major transformation. The kingdom had survived religious conflict, rebuilt its institutions, and begun to articulate broader ambitions on the world stage. But the next phase of French history would be defined by something new and powerful: the rise of royal absolutism, a system in which the king claimed unprecedented power over the state and society. Under the Bourbon dynasty, France would strengthen its government, reshape its economy, and begin constructing a colonial empire that reached across continents. The foundations of absolutism were laid during the reign of Louis XIII. Although he had taken the throne as a child, real authority initially lay in the hands of his mother, Marie de Medici, who served as regent. Political instability marked these early years, with noble factions competing for influence and regional leaders resisting central control. But when Louis XIII reached adulthood, he began asserting his authority, especially after forming a key partnership with his chief minister, Cardinal Richelieu. Richelieu played a defining role in shaping the direction of the French state. He firmly believed that the monarchy had to be strong if the kingdom was to remain stable and powerful. To achieve this, he sought to reduce the influence of the nobility, strengthen the authority of the crown, and centralize administration throughout France. One of his strategies was to appoint royal officials known as intendants, who were sent across the kingdom to carry out royal orders, collect taxes, and report directly to the central government. These officials bypassed local noble power and made the administration more efficient and reliable. Richelieu also confronted groups that he believed threatened the unity of France. The Huguenots, though protected by earlier agreements, maintained fortified towns and independent political structures. Richelieu viewed this as an unacceptable challenge to royal control. His campaign against the Huguenot stronghold of La Rochelle marked a decisive moment. After a prolonged siege, the city fell, and Huguenots lost many of their political privileges. Although they retained freedom of worship, with this victory, the crown made it clear that no group within France could maintain separate political authority. Richelieu also played an important role in foreign policy. He understood that France needed to counterbalance the power of the Habsburg dynasty, which controlled Spain and large parts of Central Europe. Although France was a Catholic nation, Richelieu did not hesitate to support Protestant states during the 30 Years' War, when it served French strategic interests. His overarching goal was to ensure that the Habsburgs did not dominate Europe. This willingness to prioritize national strategy over religious identity showed a level of statecraft that would become central to French diplomacy. When Richelieu died, his influence continued through his successor, Cardinal Mazarin, who advised the young Louis XIV. Mazarin faced immediate challenges, including a series of rebellions known as the Fronde. These uprisings were led by nobles, magistrates, and even some common citizens who opposed certain royal policies, especially taxation and centralized authority. The Fronde revealed widespread concern about the growing power of the monarchy. It also marked a moment of deep insecurity for the young king, but the failure of the rebellions ultimately strengthened the crown. Louis XIV, who witnessed firsthand the dangers of unrest, resolved to ensure that royal authority would never again be undermined when he assumed full personal control of the government. After Mazarin's death, Louis XIV brought French absolutism to its peak. Louis XIV, often called the Sun King for his radiant power, believed that the monarchy must stand at the center of everything. He famously declared, "I am the state," a phrase that captured his vision of absolute royal authority. He built the magnificent Palace of Versailles not only as a royal residence, but as a brilliant political tool. By requiring nobles to live at court for part of the year, he limited their ability to build independent bases of power in their own regions. Life at Versailles revolved around elaborate ceremonies that constantly highlighted the king's prestige. Nobles competed for the honor of performing small tasks during these rituals, reinforcing their dependence on royal favor. While Louis XIV was cultivating grandeur at home, he was also overseeing major changes to the administration and economy. His finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, introduced reforms designed to make France economically strong. Colbert promoted domestic manufacturing, improved infrastructure such as roads and canals, and encouraged foreign trade. He also believed that a strong merchant fleet and overseas colonies were essential for national power. Under Colbert's guidance, France expanded its involvement in global commerce and strengthened the structures needed to support a growing empire. French colonial ambitions took shape during this era in several regions across the world. In North America, the vast territory known as New France began to develop. French explorers, traders, and missionaries traveled deep into the interior, reaching the Great Lakes and the Mississippi Valley. They forged alliances with indigenous nations, participated in the profitable fur trade, and established scattered settlements in areas that would become Canada and parts of the United States. Although these colonies did not match the population levels of English settlements, they played a key role in France's North American strategy. In the Caribbean, France established colonies on islands such as Martinique and Saint-Domingue. These tropical territories became major producers of sugar, a hugely valuable commodity in European markets. Plantation economies depended heavily on enslaved African labor, and the transatlantic slave trade grew enormously as the demand for sugar increased. French colonial policy in these regions focused on maximizing economic returns, and the harsh realities of slavery played a central role in sustaining these plantations. In West Africa, French traders established coastal posts that served as centers for trade, including the exchange of goods and the trafficking of enslaved people. Along the Indian Ocean, France also sought influence in territories such as Madagascar and parts of India, where the French East India Company attempted to establish commercial strongholds. These early colonial efforts reflected France's growing desire to compete with other European powers, particularly England and the Netherlands. Control over trade routes, resources, and strategic territories became essential goals of French foreign policy. French colonial administrators, merchants, and missionaries all contributed to this expanding global presence. At the same time, France continued to pursue ambitious goals in Europe. Louis XIV fought several major wars aimed at expanding French territory and influence along its borders. Some campaigns brought temporary gains, such as the acquisition of regions along the frontiers of the kingdom, but prolonged military effort placed significant strain on the economy and the population. The War of the Spanish Succession consumed enormous resources and ultimately limited French expansion. Although Louis managed to place a Bourbon relative on the Spanish throne, the war prevented France and Spain from forming a unified empire. Despite these challenges, Louis XIV succeeded in creating a powerful centralized state. The administration was more structured, taxation more regular, and royal authority more secure than ever before. The monarchy's ability to project power both within France and overseas marked a significant evolution in the kingdom's development. Culture also thrived during this golden period. French literature, art, and architecture attained new heights. Writers such as Molière, Racine, and La Fontaine produced works that helped define French classical culture and are still read today. The Academy of Sciences and the Academy of Painting and Sculpture supported intellectual and artistic achievements. French language and culture began to spread across Europe, influencing courts and scholars everywhere. After the death of Louis XIV, the kingdom passed to his great-grandson, Louis XV, who inherited a state fatigued by decades of costly warfare. Louis XV eventually ruled in his own name, but his approach to governance differed from that of his predecessor. He was less inclined to dominate political life personally and more willing to rely on ministers and advisors. Although France enjoyed periods of peace and prosperity, underlying weaknesses in the state became increasingly visible. At the same time, the intellectual movement known as the Enlightenment began reshaping European thought. Philosophers, writers, and scientists challenged long-held assumptions about authority, religion, and society. Figures such as Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Rousseau argued for ideas like separation of powers, religious tolerance, individual rights, and a government that derived legitimacy from the people rather than divine right. These ideas circulated widely in France thanks to the spread of printed materials. France also continued to participate in global competition, particularly against Britain. The 7 Years' War proved disastrous for France. British forces captured major French strongholds in North America, and the eventual peace negotiations forced France to surrender most of its North American territories. The loss of these lands was a heavy blow to national pride and severely weakened France's position in global politics. Financial pressures mounted, and by the late 18th century, France was burdened by problems too large for the old regime to contain. King Louis XVI called a meeting of the Estates General, which had not convened for generations. The Third Estate, representing commoners, declared themselves the National Assembly and swore the tennis court oath not to disband until they had created a new constitution. Public anger erupted, and crowds stormed the Bastille. The Assembly abolished feudal privileges and drafted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, asserting that all men were born free and equal in rights. Louis XVI resisted these changes and attempted to flee, but his capture damaged his credibility. Foreign powers intervened, and the monarchy was eventually suspended. The National Convention declared France a republic, and the king was executed. The Reign of Terror followed, led by the Committee of Public Safety under Robespierre, with thousands executed in the name of protecting the revolution. The revolution also introduced conscription, creating large citizen armies that pushed back foreign invaders. Amid the turmoil, Napoleon Bonaparte rose to prominence. A talented military officer, he gained national attention through his victories in Italy and his bold leadership style. He staged a coup and became first consul, then crowned himself Emperor of the French. Napoleon's civil code simplified and standardized laws, embodying principles of property rights and equality before the law. He restructured education, centralized taxation, and stabilized the economy. Napoleon's armies dominated much of continental Europe through brilliant military campaigns. But his invasion of Russia ended in catastrophe. Russian forces used scorched earth tactics, and the harsh winter devastated the Grand Army. Napoleon was forced to abdicate and was exiled to the island of Elba. The Bourbon monarchy was restored, but Napoleon escaped, returned for the 100 Days, and was finally defeated at Waterloo. The First French Empire collapsed, leaving France exhausted but transformed. After Napoleon's fall, the Bourbon monarchy was restored under Louis XVIII, who introduced a constitutional charter recognizing civil liberties and a representative legislature. But tensions between royalists and liberals persisted. Charles X, who succeeded him, attempted to restore pre-revolutionary privileges, leading to the July Revolution of 1830. Charles X abdicated, and Louis Philippe, the citizen king, came to power. His July monarchy saw industrial expansion, railway growth, and the beginning of French colonization in Algeria. However, economic inequality and political exclusion led to the Revolution of 1848, which established the Second Republic. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the nephew of Napoleon I, was elected president. He staged a coup and declared himself Emperor Napoleon III, ushering in the Second Empire. Under Napoleon III, Paris was redesigned by Baron Haussmann with wide boulevards, parks, and modern sewers. Industrialization accelerated, and France expanded its colonial empire in Africa and Indochina. But the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 led to Napoleon III's capture and the collapse of the Second Empire. The Third Republic emerged despite early turmoil, including the Paris Commune, which was brutally suppressed. The Third Republic became France's longest-lasting government since the Revolution. It expanded public education, promoted secularism, built an extensive railway network, and constructed one of the largest colonial empires in the world, including West Africa, Equatorial Africa, Madagascar, and Indochina. The First World War tested France to its limits. Millions died in trench warfare along the Western Front. Colonial soldiers and workers played a crucial role in the war effort. France emerged victorious but devastated, with vast regions destroyed and enormous debt. The interwar years brought political instability and economic strain. The Great Depression fueled social tensions. When Germany invaded in 1940, France fell in just 6 weeks. The country was divided into an occupied zone and the collaborationist Vichy regime. General Charles de Gaulle led the Free French forces from exile. French colonial troops helped liberate France in 1944. After the war, the Fourth Republic struggled with decolonization. The First Indochina War ended with French defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. The Algerian War of Independence became a brutal conflict that nearly caused civil war within France. In 1958, de Gaulle returned to power and established the Fifth Republic with a strong presidency. Algeria gained independence in 1962. The Fifth Republic modernized France economically and technologically. De Gaulle pursued an independent foreign policy, withdrew from NATO's military command, and developed France's own nuclear arsenal. France became a leader in European integration, eventually helping to form the European Union. The colonial empire was largely gone, but France maintained close ties with many former colonies, particularly in Africa, through economic and military agreements. Today, France's imperial past continues to shape its identity, politics, society, and culture. The legacy of the Franks, the Capetians, the Revolution, Napoleon, and the colonial empire lives on in French law, language, art, and global influence. The history of the French Empire, stretching from the early days of the Franks to the complexities of the modern Fifth Republic, reveals a country transformed again and again by conflict, ambition, innovation, and reflection. The empire no longer exists as a political structure, but its legacy remains, woven into modern France's diverse population, its cultural institutions, its foreign policy, and its ongoing debates about memory, justice, and belonging. This journey through the full history of France's rise and reach shows how the past never truly disappears. It continues to shape the present and point toward the future. If you liked this video, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Since you stayed this long, perhaps you would like to check my other videos. Recent video is about the history of Germany. Until next time,